Well, world history, it's good to see you guys. I'm kind of upset because I recorded this lecture last week and put a lot of time into editing it. And then last night when I went to load the link, there were 2 seconds had actually made it to YouTube. Literally 2 seconds of the whole video. And I don't know why that happened, but my computer doesn't have a lot of space, so I have to delete the videos once I upload them to YouTube. So I have to re-record it, I guess, on Monday morning. This is great. So I'm gonna do this real quick, and sorry I won't have any flashy edits or anything, so I'm already out of time. But this is the last bit of our chapter, so we're just gonna go this pretty quickly. But we're gonna identify the major. What we've been doing is identifying the major explorers, the country each represented, and the region that each of them explored. So we'll continue that. We talked about Spain and Portugal, but now we're gonna move on to some other countries. We're going to discuss the basic characteristics of the Amerindian civilizations and identify the area each occupied, and then we're going to contrast the motives of the major countries during this age of exploration, which we've been doing already. But again, you guys remember that like Spain and Portugal made their way over to the New World pretty early, right? You start having them try to divide up who's going to have what. And the whole reason this whole thing started in the first place was they were trying to find ways to get to India, right? Not have to deal with Italy because they had a monopoly on who would ever pass through there. And they didn't want to deal with the Ottoman Turks who had moved up north and had conquered Constantinople. And they didn't want to have to try to get to the Silk Route because the Turks weren't exactly the nicest. So they're trying to find a new way to get to India for the spice trade. Okay, so let's talk about the French, the Dutch, and the English. With La French, as I say, you have Jacques Cartier. And I'm not good with French, by the way, so forgive me for some of my botched pronunciations here. But these are some guys you're always going to learn in history. They're very important. So Jacques Cartier was the first great French explorer in the New World. He explored what's now Canada. And as a side note on that, the natives that he heard there, they referred to settlements as Canada. So he just started using the word Canada to refer to the area, and before long that became the name of the whole country, is Canada. So, but he is considered the first great explorer. To this day, by the way, as you're going to see with these guys down here as well, Canada, if you go, the more further east you go in Canada, the more French you get. The further west, the more British. Like the western part of Canada is pretty much all, British heritage. But when you go to the part of Canada, particularly around Quebec and that area, you're going to still see a lot of French spoken, a lot of French custom, because the French explored that area initially. Okay, the next we have is Samuel de Champlain, and he was the father of New France. He explored the areas around the St. Lawrence River and founded Quebec. So, if you remember the St. Lawrence River, it runs up in basically it creates a border for some of the United States and Canada. Actually, it flows from the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. So that river is just imagine up like north, like imagine Michigan, and then over in that area, up through New York and Maine. That's where the St. Lawrence River is going to flow in that area. And he explored it and founded Quebec up near that area. And that's how you have Jacques Marquette and Louis Jolliet. I think that's how you say that. Jolliet. Anyways, but they explored the Mississippi River, and so that's obviously an important river for navigation, and those guys were the ones who explored it initially. As for the Dutch, you have one really important figure that sticks out in our textbook, Henry Hudson, and he was actually an Englishman, but who worked for the Dutch. So you might remember Christopher Columbus was an Italian, right, who worked for the Portuguese, right? Well, in the same way you have for the Spanish, sorry. In the same way you have Henry Hudson, who was actually an Englishman who worked for the Dutch. And he explored the northeastern United States today, but he explored that land, and he even claimed some land for the Dutch, including modern New York, which of course would change pretty soon, who owned that land. And then you have the English. You have John Cabot. He led the first English exploration of America. He discovered rich fisheries off the Newfoundland coast. You guys probably remember from geography last year, we talked about the 4 maritime provinces of Canada, right? That's the furthest eastern part of Canada. So you have like Prince Edward Island, you have like Newfoundland and Labrador, Anyways, but he explored that area because there's a lot of cod in that area. So there was a lot of opportunity to catch those cod and make money. So he explored that. The English, this is an important point I want to notice about the difference between the English and the Spanish as they explored. We talked about the Spanish last week, right? We talked about how the Spanish had conquistadors like Cortez, right, that came, and what they wanted to do was basically conquer and subdue the natives, use them as slaves, and then they would just keep exploring and try to find gold. The whole point was to go clean the land out of any gold or anything else that's valuable and go back. But the English had a different motive, as we're going to see more next year in United States history. When the English came, their whole point wasn't to just take stuff from the land and go. I mean, they wanted to do that. Certainly, they wanted to make money, but they also wanted to settle. They brought women and children as well. They wanted to build families. And that was ultimately going to be the thing that caused the English to stick, not the Spanish. Another thing that's worth noting too is that the English were less cruel to the Indians. Now, don't get me wrong, the English had their bad moments with the Indians too, but they were definitely less cruel than the Spanish. Okay, Jamestown, this was the first English settlement in the New World, and this was led by Captain John Smith. That was like early 1608, I believe. It was early 1600s. That's the first English settlement in the New World. Not the first settlement, but the first English settlement. St. Augustine, Florida, I think, is the first Spanish settlement, but this is the first English settlement. Okay, Afonso de Albuquerque was named the Viceroy of Portuguese holdings in the East, and he discouraged cruelty to the natives. So we're moving back here real quick. So we talked about the French, the Dutch, and the English. We're moving back to the Spanish and the Portuguese for a little bit. And Albuquerque was somebody who was known for protecting the natives, saying, hey, you guys can't just go kill these people and take their land. You need to be fair to them, and you need to work with them. And so he is pretty honored for being something of a humanitarian, at least in his day. It was around this time too that the Portuguese Empire began to fail. Remember, Portugal is a small little country on the end of the Iberian Peninsula, and they're trying to manage a pretty large commercial empire, and it was just too much, and so eventually they started to falter, and they lost control of that massive area that they had gained. Another figure worth noting is Francis Xavier. I wish we had more time to go into him, but he was a famous Jesuit missionary to Japan and made some converts over there in this time. So Christianity was making certain footholds at different times. And Xavier was a famous missionary toward that end. Okay, the last part we're going to talk about is mercantilism and capitalism. We're going to discuss the major characteristics of each, because now that we've talked about some of the main explorers and the countries sending the explorers, let's talk about the economics behind it. This will be pretty quick, but I want you to understand the systems in place here. So this looks like mercantilism, but it's mercantilism. And a mercantile system basically is an economic system that forces colonies, it's spelled wrong, but colonies to trade only with their mother country. So this, I'm not going to play the video right now, but you can kind of see from the picture here. So if England planted, like for example, think about the 13 colonies in America. Imagine for a moment, before obviously independence, imagine if New York and Rhode Island wanted to trade. They could not trade with each other in a mercantile system. They had to trade with the mother country only. So New York would have to send their goods to England, Rhode Island had to send their goods to England, and then they'd have to deal with the mother country and making trades with the other colonies. It was not a very good system, and it was not even a two-way street, because the colony was considered inferior to the mother country. The mother country could charge high taxes, charge whatever it wanted to the colony, and then the colony didn't really have any options to trade with other people. All the money, all the resources had to go back to the mother country. To be fair in this whole thing, though, of course, the mother country protected the colonies. So, if a colony tried to declare its independence too early, then they could just get conquered by another country pretty quickly. But the mother country provided protection to the colonies, but the colonies had to in turn trade only with their mother country at usually not the most fair rates. Another thing worth noting is capitalism, the joint stock company system. So we think of capitalism today as an economic system where you own what capital, and you use that to make more money. But that comes down to free market economics, free enterprise. It's a little bit more sophisticated if you look at capitalism as a whole. But the capitalism in our chapter is basically just saying, hey, look, you have money and you want to use that money to invest to make more money. It has nothing to do with the free enterprise system, not yet anyway. So people basically had money, though during this time they said, hey, I'm just going to make this up, $10,000. I want this $10,000 to grow into $20,000. So what can I do? I know. There's this explorer over here, and he's going to go over to the New World, and I think he's going to find a bunch of gold or beavers or something like that. So what you do is you would get up with other investors, and you would put your money together to fund the voyage. And then when he came back with whatever he came back with, then that would be sold, and the profits would be divided between everybody who invested. So this is what you call a joint stock company. Again, people would pool their money together to hire explorers to finance their journeys with the hopes that these people would go and locate gold and other sorts of things and make a lot of money. And in the end, you would hope to obtain what's called dividends. Again, let's say that you funded somebody who went over to the New World and found a bunch of gold and came back, and he sold that gold for a ton of money. Then your dividends would basically say, hey, you put in 30% of the money for the pool, so you get 30% of the profit. And that could be a lot of money if it's done right. For example, the British East India Company from 1609 to 1613, they had a 300% profit. That's pretty incredible. So if you invested in them, you'd be making some good money. You know, and it's funny because you look at the modern stock market, it's not really that much different than a joint stock company. It's very similar, actually. For example, when this whole pandemic broke out, my wife, she watches Jim Cramer, who's a market analyst, and he said, hey, this might be your time to invest in Zoom. You know, he said, I predict people are going to start using Zoom for meetings. And my wife actually did. She invested a little bit of money, not a lot, but she put a little bit of money in Zoom, and the shares were $4 at that time. And as everybody started using Zoom, the demand went up, so Zoom's profit went up, and the stock went from $4 a share to $14 a share, which is huge. I wish we'd put a lot of money in because we could have done pretty well with that investment, but you know, we made a little bit of money, not much, but that's how it works though, the joint stock company, is that if you put your money into the right business, then you gain some ownership in it and you get some ownership to the profits. And so that's what people were doing during this time. And you can do it today in the stock market. Okay, so this week you just watched the lecture. Again, I'm sorry, it was kind of quick. I just don't have a lot of time to go through and do all the editing I like to do, but we watched the lecture, so good job. Participate in the discussion, and you're going to leave an initial post and 2 replies. There's a worksheet I have for you guys to do. CNN 10, just make sure you watch it every day and leave a comment. And then this is important here though. The final is going to be the 13th. It's going to be next week on Wednesday. So the rule that the school has, this isn't my decision, it's the school's policy for this whole thing, is every class is given a day for the final. I have to post my final on that day, and it needs to be done by the end of that day. So I'm going to put basically the history final up for you guys. It'll be put up in the morning on Wednesday, and it's going to be due by midnight, by 11:59 p.m. So you have to take the test on that day. If it's late, that's going to be severely bad for your grade. So you have a whole day. It shouldn't take you more than a few hours at the most, I mean, really. But just make sure you're planning on doing that. And then this week, I'm going to post a study guide just so you can have a few things to look over and be ready. It's going to be a pretty high stakes test. It's going to be worth more points. So just make sure you're ready to take that exam. And if you have any questions, reach out. I recorded a final kind of like summing up history as a whole lesson in a separate video you guys can see. But I love you guys, and I hope you have a good week.